Namaskar, good morning, and welcome to this session called Europe's East Asia Conundrum. It's a very timely conversation as Europe finds itself at a crossroads. There's a war going on in Ukraine, there's an old ally going rogue in the US, and then there's China, which weaponizes trade dependence. So how should Europe reorient itself to this polarized world? Joining me in this conversation is Baiba, Minister of Foreign Affairs Latvia, and Marco Perestrello, President of NATO Parliamentary Assembly and Member of Parliament, Portugal. Good morning to both of you. Welcome to the Firstpost Raisina Ideas Pod. If I could start with you, Ms. Braže, how do you see Trump's America from Europe? Do you still see it as an ally or an adversary?
Well, certainly not an adversary and certainly as an ally, that's for sure. America for the Baltics is the essential ally and the essential counterpart. Now we have been in the EU and NATO for 20 years. We are 107 years old countries, but in the same time, 50 years, we were occupied by the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And it was a US-led stance that never recognized that occupation as legal, which allowed us to continue operating through the embassies in the US, in London, and in other places. So our statehood continued throughout the occupation period. So when we regained independence in 1990, it was very much also the partnership with the US that enabled the rebuilding of institutions, the legislation, and security. So we had Russian troops on our territory, so withdrawal of Russian troops. That was my first portfolio in the foreign ministry when I joined as a young lawyer. Right. State immunity issues, that's what I had to deal with. And it was the US, it was at that time Clinton administration that pushed those issues and achieved the withdrawal of Russia's troops. So that was, something that forms also the way we perceive America throughout the years. Yes, the current administration behaves differently from the previous administration. But our interest is bipartisan, it's very in-depth, we have a very
Does it behave like an ally, the current administration?
Yes. The US administration has not questioned strong NATO or US involvement in it. It's, there is no question about it for us. And I've been to Washington 3 times in the last 2 months, and next week I'm going again, seeing Marco Rubio and others. And yes, there are different views and there are differences between various countries. There are differences how the administrations or leaders express themselves. There are differences in various stances. But in the same time, we have to keep a clear mind, long sort of view at the developments. And the Baltic interest, again, we have large communities in the US. We have US troops in the Baltics. We buy US LNG. We spent close to 4% on defense and we'll move to 5%. So there's something that I think other Europeans can look at us and say, okay, maybe we can do more too.
Absolutely. I'll come to that point of defense spending, but let me get in Marco Perestrello here. NATO's cohesion is being put to the test by its biggest funder, and that is the United States. And it's good to know that Ms. Braže's experience has been better with Washington compared to some other versions and exchanges that we've heard about. How should Europe deal with this new America?
Europe, for the last decades, had become more dependent on different areas from different regions. When the pandemic arrived in 2019, we suddenly discovered that we were highly dependent on China, on certain health materials. When the war blasted in Ukraine in 2022, part of Europe acknowledged that it was highly dependent on Russia, on gas supply. And now European public opinion is discovering what many politicians already knew, that we are highly dependent on strategic matters on the US. And what happened with the pandemic in 2019 with the Russia aggression against Ukraine in 2022 forced us to become more autonomous and to have more self-capacities to answer the crises that were raised on those occasions. Now we can also face a situation in which we need to be acknowledged that we need to do more to become also more autonomous on strategic matters regarding the US. So I wouldn't say that the cohesion of the alliance is at stake, but I would say that to keep the cohesion of the alliance, we can take it as an opportunity to make a stronger alliance, spending up or stepping up the European capacities so that we can take care of ourselves, and on that sense have a more equal relation with the most important ally of the alliance. And for that we need also to find new partnerships, new bridges of dialogue, and also that is an opportunity to strengthen the relations, for instance, between Europe and India, and between Europe and the Mercosur in South America. Create new bridges, strengthen the relations we have with other regions of the planet, spending more on things that we need to spend more, and take that challenge that we are facing with the new US administration approach as an opportunity to become stronger and more, and with an alliance more coherent, yes, and stronger.
That's a very interesting thought. That's like saying that Donald Trump in the White House is a pandemic-like moment for Europe. You've
No,
not used the words decoupling and de-risking, but you've essentially described the same thing.
That's your words. I just made a comparison with situations that created occasions for Europe to become stronger after certain situations that showed our vulnerabilities. That's the point.
I will come to Baiba Braže in a bit, but let me also ask you about the defense spending, since you're saying that this is an opportunity for Europe to do more, to be self-dependent and so on. There's talk of 5% spending on defense. Do you think smaller economies are prepared to do that much?
Well, smaller economies need to be prepared to do that much. It's much more expensive not to have the capability to answer for your needs that to have not. So if to keep peace, we need strength, and it's much more expensive to fight a war than to find a way to spend more on defense. But the main problem with defense, in European defense, I wouldn't say it's the spending. It's the ability to create real capacities able to answer the needs we have. Because on the last 10 years, we raised our defense spending. Although there are 6 countries that are not spending 2%, the global defense spending on Europe is already on 2%, and this raised in the last 10 years, but those 2% did not achieve stronger capacities, military capacities in Europe. So the choice that we need to make, the decision that we need to make, probably in The Hague next June, on the Hague summit, is what capacities do we need, which are the contributions of each country to that capacities, and after that we need to fix the amount of percentage of the GDP that we need to spend. The process is the opposite of what we have done, because we created a percentage goal, but we are not able to match a correspondence between that spending and stronger capacities. In the last 10 years, we spent more and we have no more capacities. This needs to change. We need to have more capacities, and that will cost a certain amount that we need to be prepared to spend.
Yes,
we also need the GDP from which to have the percentage.
Yes.
So we actually need economies.
Yes.
So that is where...
But as a leader in this space, you know,
Right.
Latvia spends, what, 3.45% of
3.5 this year,
Yes.
4% next year, and then in next 2 years.
What's your
moving
advice
towards
to
5.
NATO allies?
Listen, there is no prosperity without security. So security obviously is something that we all have to take seriously. We have to understand that Russia's warfare concept, there is one concept. There's part that is so-called conventional warfare, what we are seeing in Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And there is non-conventional warfare, which is aggression, military aggression. But in the same time, that warfare is taking place across the world, in all European countries, in Asia and other places, because it's influence. Russia is trying to gain influence by all means and to achieve its political aims. In Ukraine, it also chose to resort to military means to achieve its political objectives, to subjugate Ukraine. So it's an imperial colonial policy. Because Ukraine wanted to make its own choices how to live, and Russia didn't want to allow them to do that. So, it's a pretty straightforward type of evaluation. For us, priorities are very clear. As I said, we need economies, we need the growth, so we are investing a lot in defense, but in the same time, we are investing through investment in defense, also in defense industries. And defense industries in various ways, both producing hardware stuff such as Patria vehicles, but also a lot of dual tech. So it gives back to the economy, it gives back to the innovation, it gives back through the professions, whether engineering, whether software development, AI. So we have quite significant growth in that sector, so which also will allow, of course, for much more connections here. I brought a business delegation to India for the first time, and we are having really good conversations with your private sector, and that has a lot to do with tech sector, whether it's space, whether it's biomedicine, and so on and so forth. So it's not a lost money per se. It's not a lost money, but we have to be, as you said, President, I think. Also, one thing in Europe, especially in the EU, that we have to have that interoperability in place, that we cannot have the ammunition, which doesn't fit barrels, like the same caliber 155, but then we found out that there are different barrels, so they actually don't fit each other.
But you can look for it from the Indian perspective.
Yeah.
And if you will have such an important market as Europe, developing industries regarding defense, what it means to India with opportunities for supplying chains, for supplying materials, for manpower that we will need, qualified manpower, even for India as a state, new opportunities of procurement, because I think the secret of all this crisis we've been living in the last years is no one can depend only from one single region or state. So diversification of markets, diversification of suppliers is the key to have a safer and prosper world. And that is true for Europe, and is also true for India.
India has always believed in that. India's always worked with the varied partners and not boxed itself into alliances. Let's talk about China. Europe refers to China as, and I'm quoting, a strategic partner, an economic competitor, and a systemic rival. China, we know, is close to Russia. China is also your second biggest trade partner after the US. The US is changing with the president who believes in deals and tariff wars. Given this backdrop, how are you engaging with the Chinese?
As I said, China will always be a partner for everybody. And we need to deal with China. China is not going anywhere. It will be always there. It will be always an important supplier, and it will be always an important market. The key issue is that we cannot depend on China, and we learned that lesson in 2019 when the pandemic started, and we weren't able to supply the minimum protection equipments for our population because we were completely depending on China suppliers, and that proved to be a wrong option. So I would say that China will always be there. It will always be an economic competitor. It's a strategic competitor in the Indo-Pacific, and spreading to Africa and spreading to South America. It's a strategic competitor that we need to deal with. The secret, on my point of view, is never to become dependent on China. That's the basic point.
There's also the security aspect, as you mentioned. I think we have to be also pretty open about it, because it has been published also in open intelligence reviews that China's nuclear ambition and nuclear capability development will soon be at the level of the US and Russia. So China's nuclear warheads, the numbers are growing, the delivery vehicles, the nuclear triad will be finished, which presents a challenge not only for East Asia, for Asia as such, but for global stability. Because I think it's crucially important to have transparency about objectives, to have transparency about possible verification, to have those talks, to have those sort of strategic balance engagements, and that is not happening, and that creates, I think, a challenge for security, for a global security also. In the same time, of course, for economic factors, for EU, you already mentioned China is important. There are obviously competitive challenges, because with regard how China has supported and subsidized its industry, which has provided not a level playing field for European companies or other countries' industries, which then is very difficult to compete, not only within the EU, but also in the third markets.
Yeah.
So, and that is something that is not fair. So the level playing field, when we speak about it, that means just that we compete on the same footing, that we don't subsidize where it's not necessary, because we believe Chinese companies can be competitive without subsidies, and then that would be a fair competition. Or also with regard to economic coercion, there are cases where we know where other countries have come forward and said that they've been put in an unfavorable situation through that economic coercion. Okay, that is also something that is not exactly, and we need, that is not exactly sort of the way that we behave, so we should also be able to talk about it. But there are also issues on which China can be a partner.
But
Climate is a big thing.
Yes,
Climate is a big thing, and what China has done through the.
But I want to dwell on the security challenges.
Sure.
European NATO allies have called China a decisive enabler in the
Russia's
Ukraine war. There have been incidents of sabotage and undersea cables being cut, with Chinese ships apparently being involved. Do you see China as a security threat increasingly directly for Europe, in Europe?
It's not identified as a threat, it's identified as a challenge. Russia has been identified officially as a threat for Euro-Atlantic security because of its aggression against Ukraine. So from our perspective, it's pretty straightforward. We have three big priorities in security. One is to keep NATO strong and keep US and transatlantic relationships strong. Second, support Ukraine's self-defense, because again, Ukraine defends herself in accordance with the United Nations Charter, Article 51, which is also actually a basis for NATO's existence, which is the right to individual or collective self-defense. So NATO is also a UN charter-based organization. So for Ukraine to defend herself, we would, as you said, clearly prefer China not enabling Russia's aggression, which it is doing. Because its exports, unfortunately, it's not necessary for China. And third, for us, is actually weakening Russia's military capabilities, ability to wage war. And that is something that is important, I think, for the whole world, because we are seeing Russia expanding through its militias in Africa, destabilizing countries, regions,
extracting resources.
Exactly. I mean, it's colonial, again, colonial follow. North Korea.
By the extraction of resources.
Yes, one more dimension of China's power, and that is technology. And Chinese firms have been accused of cyber warfare and espionage and stealing user data. And several European nations have banned Chinese platforms like TikTok and now DeepSeek. What sort of a challenge, not threat, do Chinese technology firms pose to Europe?
A huge challenge, not only to Europe, to India, it's a global challenge that Chinese capacity on technological, on AI, on quantum computers it means to the globe. The answer that we need to find is the ability to develop our own capacities of investigation on those critical areas, being able to dispute with the Chinese technological development an even better one. But we need to enable that capacity in Europe that stood behind not only with China but also with the US, and that's one of the main challenges that is now Europe facing, and is a part of the growing autonomy we need to develop in the European Union, that has a market big enough to assure this development.
But in the same time, it's important to have that respectful dialogue with China, because again, and we have pretty open relationship. You know, our economic relationship is not so important for Latvia per se. There's as for the whole of EU, Chinese exports.
Do smaller European countries have a say in how Europe as a whole engages?
Of course, the common foreign policy and defense policy is unanimity.
On a double capacity on this relation with big powers, because our relation with big powers like China or even the US is on the capacity of members of the European Union, and we deal as a bloc, but we also have bilateral relations with China.
Absolutely.
In my country, we have strong relations, commercial relations.
So
with
it's
China
important to talk
Yeah.
and to be open in that dialogue, but in the same time also about the issues that are painful, or that we see where there's fairness lacking, whether that's economy, whether that's security or other issues. But also, to tell you frankly, in economic relationships, of course, that huge trade deficit that is between the EU and China is very much based on the issues. As I said, you know, that the EU has been pretty open about opening its markets and, you know, letting countries and their products compete, and in the same time entering Chinese market is very difficult, very difficult. The non-trade barriers are very prominent, and that is where the companies are not happy, because as a result they are not able to receive the same treatment that we award in the single market of the EU. So that again is something that needs to be addressed. That's what the Commission is doing. The trade is Commission's competence, and that's obviously where the countries of the EU gives a mandate to the European Commission to deal with that, and that's what happens.
You've cautiously kept your relationship with China limited to trade, but now Europe is moving as a security player in the Indo-Pacific. Does that have a bearing on your ties with Beijing? Does it strain the relationship?
Not really, no, because I mean, countries like Indonesia or Philippines or Australia or New Zealand or others, or Pacific Island states, they all have their interests. So it's important for us in Europe to know what those interests are, to engage and to build something positive out of those. And that's why so many free trade agreements have come about. And we really hope also to have the free trade agreement with India. The whole Commission college was here to talk about it. So we want to build on that, because we believe, also because, to tell you frankly, democracies matter. You know, it is important to have a system, and democracies are different among themselves, so we are not identical at all. But in the same time, it gives that reliability also for the companies, for the businesses, that you can have that reliable relationships, that you will have institutions on which to rely if there are disputes, that, you know, you can sort things out, but also that there is a long-term sort of reliance on being here, working here, producing, made in India, to build on 2047 government strategy for India becoming the top 3 economy of the world, because again, that is a mutual interest also for us.
Yes, and it's good to hear European leaders increasingly talking about how democracies are different and that should be okay, and there's no one template that everyone has to follow. That is a change in tone certainly, and much appreciated. Marco Perestrello, NATO is increasingly also looking to engage with India on weapons manufacturing, on joint military drills. What sort of a relationship do you see between New Delhi and NATO going forward?
Precisely what I mentioned a while ago.
Yeah.
When we are developing the need of the growing industry in Europe, that is an opportunity for the Indian private sector to engage with the European private sector that is going to work on that industry capacity. And if we can work on better interoperability, that is also good for India to have new opportunities of procurement, and also India reduce their dependence on just one country or one region. So it will be better for India, and it will be better for Europe to create new common capacities that are able to reduce our dependencies from others, and to become more capable in that sense. So what I see now as an opportunity with the development of the European military industry is an opportunity for both blocks to become stronger and more reliable on each other. It's an opportunity also to increase the trade between the two countries, and that will make both stronger on the defense of the interests or strategic interests that you have and that we also have on the Indo-Pacific area.
Yes.
NATO has more than 40 partnerships, from Middle East to Central Asia to Indo-Pacific. Even Colombia is a partner of NATO. So every partnership is very different. So there is no one sort of type of measurement that if you are a partner, how you have to be. And that involves sometimes training on issues such as cyber, or sharing the knowledge, or it involves training of peacekeepers, economic security issues. It can be subsea cables. So there's different interests that different partners have in their relationship with NATO. So whatever the interest would be in this case, if India decides it does have an interest, it can be on defense industry, for example, or on standardization, or on other issues. I think there will be a lot of interest among the countries in NATO, because at the end, NATO is also an intergovernmental organization. It consists of 32 member states.
Yes.
And Indian military is, of course, a very strong military, and I think it would be very interesting, actually, to have that relationship also there, to see whether we can build on something.
I say it's a very exciting time to be
a very important part of this is to establish a permanent political dialogue. That's what we are trying to do here at Raisina Dialogues, and we are establishing on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly a bridge of permanent dialogue with the Indian Parliament. And I think that can be a very important and relevant part of this mind like it.
Absolutely.
But India is an anchor country for the whole Indo-Pacific, and it's great to have a country like India here, such a strong democracy, such a strong economy.
I think we all agree that we need dialogue and we need some level of policy consistency going forward. But I think it's a very exciting time to be policy makers. Your decisions are going to shape our future. So I wish you both all the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.